one of the topics that I'm really intrigued by but don't know enough about.
And people say, you're a dealer. And I'm like, no, I'm a doula. It's very different.
What is a doula?
I want to trek across the Grand Canyon on my own and then have 24 hours in Vegas and come back. And he was like, of course you do. If it was down to him, we'd never do anything, but we'd probably be quite rich. So we managed to source somewhere, I can't even remember now where that was from, and had no clue whatsoever what we were doing. And in hindsight, it actually made my anxiety worse. Something needs to change. I don't have a huge trust or faith in the mainstream medical system. Psilocybin saves lives and it's being denied to so many people. We're in a mental health crisis globally, and we have something that helps people beyond any other medication ever known to man.
Welcome back to the Not Quite Pod. Today we've got Naomi with us. Naomi, do you just quickly want to introduce yourself and let everyone know a bit about yourself?
Yeah, hi everyone, and thank you for inviting me on, Charlie. So I'm Naomi, and I am a microdosing coach and somatic therapist and a doula.
Quite a combination, and I'm really excited about this conversation because it's one of the topics that I'm really intrigued by but don't know enough about, so I'm very excited.
Amazing.
First things first, can you give us a bit more context of like how your journey this far and how you've ended up where you are now as a microdosing coach? Because it's quite a unique path. I was doing some reading on you, and you've done quite a few different jobs and different sort of areas and genres throughout your life. So I just wanted to get sort of the context on that. Yeah,
sure. Yeah. So my story is really... historically, I trained as a pediatric nurse after school and then went on to train as a midwife. I didn't complete my midwifery training because, in all honesty, I just couldn't hack working in the NHS. And this was at the end of the 90s. And unfortunately, it's got a lot worse. So I then went on and I was a private nanny for many years until I had my own children. I've got 3 boys. And when I had my first son, Harry, that was really a game changer for me. It really opened my eyes to many different things. But I began training as an antenatal teacher and became a doula. Even though it seems like my career has changed somewhat, there is this thread of commonality that runs through it. And all the things that I have done and learned in my life have been so instrumental to where I am now. I really feel that. I wouldn't go back and I wouldn't change anything because all of it's been useful to me. A lot of it, though, like my nursing training and my midwifery training, I feel like the past 10 years, I've been unlearning a lot of that stuff. It's been a process of unlearning stuff that I feel I was somewhat conditioned to learn as a really young woman. And to say, I'm married to Aidan and my boys. Obviously, I have a 13-year-old, a 9-year-old and an 8-year-old. I home educate them. That's also been a journey. Just this past year, I took them out of mainstream school and decided to when I say home educate, I outsource the home education because I do not have the patience to have my children at home all the time. But they go to kind of an alternative educational facility here in Brighton. So I live in Brighton on the on the coast of the UK.
Can I just jump in? I just wanted to ask, because it's not a word that I'd come across until I started researching you. What is a doula?
Good question. Yeah, I just presume everyone knows. I often say, I'm a doula, and people say, you're a dealer. And I'm like, no, I'm a doula. It's very different. A doula essentially is someone who supports women during pregnancy, birth, and the postpartum, but then we're not medical. So it's kind of emotional support, physical support, informational support, spiritual support, and you tend to, you have to really. They don't yet really have doulas within the NHS. It's your own business, your own venture. And doulas are. It's not a new thing. There's always been doulas. They've just been called many different things in many different cultures. But basically, someone who is of service to women. Generally, we think of them during the childbearing years, but actually, a doula the word is far more encompassing than just birth. Obviously, because I am a psychedelic doula, and although some of that is related to birth, it is also related to death and everything in between. A doula can support people through any kind of life transition. You get divorce doulas, neurodivergent doulas. There's almost anything you can think of. There will be a doula for that sort of for support during whatever that may be for.
I love that. I didn't even say to us like doing the research. I didn't really know that it was a thing. And like I always think, I mean, I'm a man, never gonna bear a baby. But I always think like, God, it's so much pressure. And like as because me and my partner were discussing it yesterday, saying that like, even from the traditional sense of a midwife, because of the pressure that the NHS is under, the midwives can't provide the care that they necessarily would have years ago. So then I can see the perfect position for a doula, but no one really talks about that. None of my close family, friends or relatives or anyone's had them. So I'm like, this is, great idea.
It's definitely becoming more known. And it became sort of more in the mainstream because it was reported that Meghan Markle had a doula for the birth of Archie. And so it kind of, it became sort of a bit fashionable, to have a doula. So it is a bit more well known, and I, often have the presumption that everyone knows that there are doulas out there. But like you say, many, many people don't know that support is out there. And, like you say, also midwives are, if you're a midwife working in the NHS, you're in a very, very difficult situation because you can't really be with women, which is what midwife means, because of so many things, political things, lack of money, a million different things. It's in crisis. So there is such a need for doulas for sure. But there is this sort of historical ambivalence towards doulas from midwives. A lot of people think doulas are wannabe midwives, and that's not true. But yeah, it's an interesting world to work in for sure.
I think it's always weird when people have that conundrum, that attitude towards someone who's just trying to help in the same sphere. They always think, oh, you're coming for their job. And I'm like, no, I'm just here to support and add a bit of extra support or add a different area of knowledge. People get so precious about it.
I know it is. It's the society we live in. It's like you're either with us or against us. Midwives sometimes don't understand the role of the doula, and also, we encourage our clients to ask difficult questions. Not to necessarily always comply. That can make the midwives' lives much more difficult. So I can understand that there is a bit of friction there. But also when midwives and doulas work together, it's pure magic. When the midwife and the doula have a good relationship, when I've got many friends who are midwives, and it is such a beautiful thing. Like you say, if we come together and both of us want to support the woman through this process, it's an incredible experience for everyone. But yeah, it's not as straightforward as that, unfortunately.
No, as I say, it's always that whole thing of collaboration's key. Collaboration, communication, they're like two things I always bang on about. And people are like, might as well just get it tattooed on your forehead. And I'm like, yeah. But it's so true because so much of it comes down to teamwork and communication, because a lot of the time the misunderstandings come from someone not communicating it properly.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's so much of it is that. You're right. Yeah.
It's and the other thing I wanted to come back on is you mentioned earlier that you've chosen to homeschool or outsource your children's education to alternative provision. How can I ask? I don't, sorry if it's a bit of a personal question. Can I ask why? Just because I'm curious.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, when I was saying, when I had Harry, who's my eldest son, and my eyes were kind of opened, a huge part of that was a sort of a journey into questioning and sort of not trusting so much the kind of mainstream systems that we have, healthcare. The education part didn't really come until much later, but I once you start on that road of questioning things, it's like then suddenly you start to question everything. And I really wasn't happy with a lot of the policies and things that were happening in schools. For instance, I never really liked the kind of reward punishment schemes that a lot of schools have. And I didn't like the sort of forcing children to sit and listen and be quiet, especially, I think, young boys. My middle boy, he was due to start school when he would have still been 4. And it was just seemed ridiculous that so much was expected of him at such a young age, and that went against the nature of being a child. But I was in this kind of stuck in this thing where, I was working as a doula, and working as a doula is really tough because you're on call all the time. You never know when women are going to give birth. So. We had live-in au pairs over the years, and I just felt like how would I home? I really was fascinated by home education. I made friends who home educated, and I was just like, I don't know how I'd ever do this. Like, I don't have enough stability in when I'm going to be around, etc. But it came to a head when, and I was going to talk about this at some point if it comes up, but, I suffered with really bad anxiety in 2020. And this culminated in me taking the kids out of school and my husband taking a sabbatical and us living in Costa Rica for a few months in a community out there. And there they went to this sort of Waldorf-inspired school in the jungle where they were sort of barefoot running through the jungle. It was just such a different way of educating children that encompassed all the amazing qualities of being a child without restricting them. And they absolutely loved it. And especially my middle son, who always struggles a little with school more than the other two, he flourished. And when we came back to England, I was just like, I don't know if they did go back into mainstream school, and I was just like, something needs to change, because it was like once I started seeing what I didn't like, it more and more things came to light. And sort of one of the last straws was my eldest son, where he did a little bit of secondary school, and they had this reward punishment scheme where they would get points for, good behavior and sort of minuses for bad. And I would be emailed throughout the day, with how he was doing, which, I sometimes get 13 emails a day. Anyway, he got a behavior point, which was, a negative thing, because he had taken his friend to the first aid room because he'd had a nosebleed, and he was 3 minutes late to his class. And I was just like, what? No. Like, said to my son, you always take your friend with the nosebleed to the first aid, and when I spoke to the school, I said to them, what is this teaching our kids? And they were like, we understand, but we have thousands of kids. We cannot accommodate, any kind of deviance from, if they're late, they're late. It doesn't matter what the excuse is. And I was like, I'm done. I am done. And so, we sold our house. We were living in London. We sold our house and we downsized, we moved to Brighton so that I didn't have to do the work that I was doing, and so the kids could have a different experience of education. Ultimately, it was many things that led to that.
I think it's really interesting because I've done traditional school, gone through it all, And but then one thing that's different with my story is I grew up with both my parents self-employed, and at the time of growing up, their both businesses were quite successful. So in which point, me and my sister got to go on do lots of wonderful things that we wouldn't necessarily have done. But I always come back to I learned so much more doing those like really cool things that were really random to some people, but I loved it compared to what I did in school. And then I look at it now, having now I work a normal job and obviously do this on the side and trying to build everything out. And everyone now says, well, it's sort of, you finish school and then it's like, right, what are you good at? And focus in on that. And I'm like, so why do we have to learn all of this other stuff? Like, don't get me wrong, I get a base level of knowledge, 100%. You need that. Reading, writing, 100% behind that. But I still, not to sound like your classic 13-year-old, but why do we need algebra? No one needs algebra.
I've never needed to use algebra. Yeah, I agree. And, I actually really liked school. I never, I was someone who really enjoyed learning. I enjoyed the school experience pretty much. But, and my husband is a really good example of someone who he went to like a local comprehensive. It was quite rough. He hated it. I don't think he got any GCSEs, and he is actually in an incredibly high-end job in the city, earning incredible money. And it was no thanks to school, really, in all honesty. He had the drive and ambition that when he left school, he started at the bottom and he worked his way up. So it's interesting. I think school definitely suits some people, but I think actually the majority, it doesn't. And it's like, we need to have different options for different people. I'm not saying that school is bad and no one should go to school. Definitely not. But there just seem, we're having to pay for this alternative education, which we're happy to do. But, that's a privileged position. Not everyone can afford to do that. And that's a real shame. That's a real 100%, shame.
And it's that whole thing, as you say, it's that having just having different options. I think too many times, like you're almost forced into this box where, as I always think, like, play to people's strengths. If a child shows a strength in a certain area, craft that area, because it's probably going to be where they're going to enjoy it and where they're going to end up.
Absolutely.
So put the energy there.
The really good point, because like Harry, he's very into maths and science and tech. That's what he enjoys, what he's good at. He doesn't enjoy art. He never has, never liked drawing. And and also languages, no good at languages, no interest in languages. And he was having to do that at secondary school, and he hated it. And it actually sort of then impacted his whole learning experience at school. He was coming home, he's like, oh, I hate school, it's so rubbish. And I'm like, but you really enjoy like maths and science. He's like, yeah, but I have to do art and languages, and it's like such a shame that you're being forced to do some subjects that we know by the age of 13 you're probably not going to be an artist, or by that age you have a good idea of what your interests are. And by home educating and the options that we have here in Brighton, he's able to focus his time and energy into everything that he really enjoys, and he is loving it. He actually does longer days than school days. And I keep saying to him, if it's too much, just saying, he's like, it's a lot, but I really love it. And I'm just like, that just fills my heart with joy. That's the goal. My child is saying no. He does 10 till 5:30 most days. He does sport, he does maths, he does English, but he loves it. It's in a very informal way. He has a great group of friends that there's loads of kids that do it with him. He is having the time of his life. He loves learning. To me, it's just like we made the right decision. It's very clear. But I wish everyone had access to that,
Yeah. I think it's hard. Like, I'm at a point in my life where I'm now looking at it and looking at what I'm doing and going, almost that classic thing of it, there's got to be more to life than this. And say that's the whole thing, is like you're instilling that in a youngster from the get-go of like, there's endless possibilities. Yeah, it's really hard to explain. It's something I've pondered with a lot recently, and it's a big thing. I wanted to come on to, obviously you struggled a bit in 2020, wasn't it? And then you went over to Costa Rica. Why Costa Rica?
Do you know what? I had been looking for many years I am someone who loves to travel. I love having experiences. I'm always looking for something crazy to do. You know, like for instance, when I turned 40, my husband said to me, you know, what do you want to do? Do you want to have a lunch? Do you want to have a party? And I thought about it for a couple of days and I said, I want to trek across the Grand Canyon on my own and then have 24 hours in Vegas and come back. And he was like, of course you do. like not one for going out for lunch with family or having a party. You want to, trek the Grand Canyon. And I did it. But it was for years, I was like, I really want to, as a family, go somewhere and live in, I am someone I'm someone who is spiritual. That's been something that, again, I feel really came into my consciousness after the birth of my first son. And I was just like, I want to go somewhere with like-minded people and have an experience that's completely different to this life here. So it was already something I was really looking into. And when I started to experience this really crippling anxiety in 2020, and so did my husband. Also, he was suffering with burnout. And I was just like, this is the time for us to go and have this experience that we've been talking about for years. And I found this place in Costa Rica because Costa Rica is full of spiritual communities and places you can go like that. Mm-hmm. And so that's why Costa Rica came into it. And I found this place. It was like an eco-spiritual community in the middle of the jungle. I didn't really actually, in all honesty, know that much about it. It was very much a leap of faith. Mm-hmm. I was just like, this looks amazing. I briefly scanned a paragraph about it. And I was like, let's do it. We booked it. We went. And actually, it was... So, I'm someone, I believe in synchronicity, and we were supposed to go there. There's so many things. It was so life-changing on so many different levels. And I am someone who's very impulsive and spontaneous, and I don't overthink stuff. I like it, I'm in, I'm all in. So that's kind of, the Costa Rica thing was just because, there are so many places like that there.
I have to ask, obviously, because I know your husband was struggling with a similar thing, but is your husband as impulsive and as spiritual as you? Because I've just got this image in my head of your husband going, of course you want to go to Costa Rica and live in the jungle.
You know what? Aidan is not at all like me. He is very... measured. He weighs up the pros and cons. He overthinks everything. We are the perfect match because, if it was down to him, we'd never do anything, but we'd probably be quite rich. If it was down to me, we would have done a million more things and be completely broke, and we kind of meet in the middle. So we're the perfect combination. But I think the reason he went for it was because he himself was going through a bit of a crisis, and he is definitely on a spiritual journey. He has been, I think I kind of definitely was the one that introduced the kind of spiritual path into the family. Mm-hmm. But he has been amazing. He has embraced it. He has listened to me for hours. He has come to talks. I think as well, when he went to Costa Rica, he actually ended up doing ayahuasca there, which, if you know, or if you don't know, or your listeners don't know, is a plant medicine that's fairly powerful. And it changed him, as it does. So he... we kind of had this joke that he looked like the accountant who had stumbled into the wrong bit of the jungle, because he was very clean shaven, short hair, no tattoos. And literally every guy there had a man bun, covered in tattoos, like big beards. He stuck out like a sore thumb, but he totally embraced it. And he's on his own journey that's very similar to mine. So yeah, he's on board.
Has he come back and gone straight back into London corporate life, or has he gone in a different direction?
No, he is unfortunately still in the corporate life. He works from home, which is good. There is an exit. We have an exit plan. We're trying to be smart about it. There is, I'm hoping that within the next couple of years, he will be able to come away from that, and he will be able to embrace a life more of freedom. We'll have more freedom to travel. And he will be doing something that fills his heart with joy and adds value to society, whereas now he feels he's like in the rat race. His soul is being sucked into this void. But it's a process, and for him, it's not something he can just leave behind on a whim.
Yeah.
Especially when we're having to pay for their children's home edding, etc.
Yeah.
So we're trying to be clever about it. Yeah, but we're lots of planning going on.
I feel like a lot of people are on that journey of like, what is an exit route that we can take?
Definitely. I mean, if it was down to me, we'd be living off grid somewhere, probably in Portugal, I think, living in a yurt. But I don't think he's quite at that stage yet.
Fair enough. I do obviously I want to dive into your specialist area. So first thing I want to ask is, what the hell is microdosing?
So microdosing is the act of taking super tiny amounts, normally of psychedelics. It is it's a sub-hallucinogenic experience, which means you do not have a classical psychedelic experience when you microdose. You do have some effects from it, but they're not hallucinogenic in nature. It's taking, if you think of a recreational dose of a psychedelic, and I specialize in psilocybin, which is what we would know as magic mushrooms. It's kind of a tenth to a 20th of a recreational dose. So we're talking tiny, tiny, tiny amounts, and taking on a semi-regular basis over a sort of set period of time for many, many reasons. But most people are aware of microdosing because of through anxiety and depression, that those are the main sort of reasons that people are coming into the microdosing experience, because they want relief from anxiety and depression in particular. But there are many, many other benefits to microdosing. But I think some people have this idea that you're having like a mini trip experience when you take it, and you absolutely don't. When you microdose, you can go to work, you can look after your children, you can drive a car. It doesn't impact your everyday life. In that respect, you should be able to do all those things, and if you can't, then it's too high a dose.
So what are some of the obviously everyone's experience is different, but what are some of the common experiences that people have from microdosing? Because from the reading I did about it, kind of, from what I can understand, it just makes you feel sharper, and sort of you're able to connect the dots quicker. And just, it almost gets rid of the gunk in your brain, is the best way I understood it.
I mean, in what we know about microdosing and psychedelics in general is they increase the amount of neuroplasticity in your brain. And neuroplasticity is where you can create new neural pathways. Our brain is not a rigid structure. It constantly evolves. And we have neuroplasticity in our everyday life. It's not that that's unique to psychedelics, but the psychedelics seem to create more flexibility, more plasticity in the brain, so that we have an ability to, like you say, connect dots, have greater insights, create new habits and behaviors much more quickly than if we weren't taking the psychedelics. Yeah, I mean, there are so many, a lot of people, I mean, it's also hugely popular in like Silicon Valley. They use it for, motivation, focus, creativity. It also, the way it works in your brain is that it allows different parts of the brain to communicate that normally don't have access to each other. So when we're a baby and a child and our brain is developing, we have this period of time where the brain as a whole can communicate much more freely. And as we develop, the brain becomes more segmented. But what psychedelics do is allow often these parts of the brain to start communicating again. And we don't know everything about how they work. And in some ways, I'm not that interested in the science and sort of the neuroscience aspect of it, because I'm much more interested in the spiritual and emotional side of psilocybin. But it can be really helpful to understand on a physical level what is happening, that actually these compounds can change the chemistry and the structure of our brains. It's pretty amazing.
That is pretty crazy. And I think as well is that whole thing of everyone's as you did, everyone's struggling a lot with mental health at the moment, and it's the place they have for supporting with that. What was your experience with microdosing, and obviously your journey with mental health and anxiety? How did microdosing help?
Yeah, so like I mentioned already, in 2020, it was at the end of 2020, I experienced this crippling anxiety that seemed to come out of nowhere. Although now, having done lots of work around this, I recognize that anxiety was always there, but in a different form. But I think because of what was happening in the world, although I was never someone who was afraid of COVID, it wasn't sort of COVID anxiety, but it was more, I think, tapping into the sort of collective consciousness of fear that was obviously permeating everything. I think it was to do with that. And I just spiraled into this anxiety, so much so that I at times couldn't even leave the house. It was so bad. And I, throughout sort of the journey up until that point for me, is I don't have a huge trust or faith in the mainstream medical system, having worked within the NHS and as a nurse, as a student midwife, and then as a doula. Sort of going into mainstream medicine would be my very last resort. So when I had this anxiety, I was looking for an alternative. And I tried a few different herbal things, which, helped somewhat, but nothing really was helping enough for me to sort of function. And I watched a documentary one night with Aidan, my husband, two documentaries, actually. One was Fantastic Fungi, which is on Netflix. A lot of people have seen that. Another was Magic Medicine, which was about the studies at Imperial College London with treatment-resistant depression. And psychedelics was something I had experimented with as a teenager, magic mushrooms, blah, blah, blah. But I became really drawn and interested in, started reading up about it, that it could help with anxiety. And I just felt like, it's something that's natural, it grows in nature. And we were just like, let's give it a go. So we managed to source it from somewhere, I can't even remember now where that was from, and had no clue whatsoever what we were doing. And in hindsight, it actually made my anxiety worse at times, because, psilocybin is an amplifier of emotions. So, dosage is so important. And if you if you take too high a dose, it can make you in a more emotional, bring up more stuff for you. And so there were times where I was spiraling further into the anxiety or having things come up that felt really hard. But for some reason, I just kept on. I kept on sort of reading and learning. And so, for a good year and a half, there were times where I did feel better. And it was actually when we went to Costa Rica, and I didn't realize that the community that we were going to was huge in plant medicine. Mushrooms was very much a part of their community. And it was here that I really began to understand how the microdosing worked. And I also took part in larger dose ceremonies. And yeah, it was there that my anxiety started to transform. But it was, and part of the reason I'm so passionate about what I do is because I want to save people the experience that I had in the beginning, where I didn't know what I was doing and I was making myself worse rather than better. I want to be able to save people that experience. But yeah, it was quite the journey.
Yeah, especially with getting access to it over here as well. It's not easy, and that was actually one question I was going to come on to later, but it feeds perfectly into what I've just said of what's your opinion on the issue surrounding legality of psychedelics and mushrooms? And because it's what I found interesting was I was speaking to a guy when I was in Amsterdam, and he was basically technically I haven't read up on it, but technically the legal side of Amsterdam is essentially the government covering their face and pretending it's not happening. So I just wanted to see what your view on the legalities around it. Have we get around it? Because obviously we've seen a huge shift happen with cannabis and marijuana and see that change happen. So what have you seen being directly involved in the industry?
I actually think it's pretty criminal that it's not legalized for therapeutic use in the UK. I mean, we in the UK are at the forefront of some of the research that's being done that is undeniably helping save lives. Psilocybin saves lives, and it's being denied to so many people. We're in a mental health crisis globally, and we have something that we know through research that helps people beyond any other medication ever known to man. This medication is blowing everything else out the water. Why is it not legal in the UK? I feel really, really angry and passionate about it. I think it will. Within, I think, the next couple of years, they'll be forced to, downschedule it and legalize it because there's more and more research coming out all the time. The things that really boil my blood are things like in the Imperial College research that they did with treatment-resistant depression, and we're not talking about microdosing here, we're talking about larger doses. But they showed that from one sitting or one large experience with a therapeutic approach, in people who had treatment-resistant depression, some of these people had depression that was debilitating for over 20 years, that all their depression symptoms were gone from that experience, but for up to 8 months. And that's not having to take any other medication. That's just one time. Yeah. And the heartbreaking thing is Dr. Rosalind Watts and Robin Carhart Harris, who are the two lead scientists in charge of that research, it absolutely was heartbreaking for them because after 6 to 8 months, these people started to experience the symptoms again. They were unable to help them because legally they were only allowed to administer one dose. And so, it's just heartbreaking, but what you're doing is you're forcing people to go out and source the medicine themselves, and the risks that are associated with that. So I am a big fan and advocate of it being legalized in the UK. But the caveat to that is in the trials that we're seeing all over the world, they're not using mushrooms because mushrooms are a fruiting body. They're inconsistent with the amount of psilocybin that's in each mushroom. So in some ways, it's very understandable that they cannot use mushrooms for clinical studies. But what they're doing is they're isolating the psilocybin molecule and putting it into a tablet. And in my view, it isn't just the psilocybin that is helpful to us. It is the synergy of the whole mushroom. When you look into the power and wisdom and knowledge of the mycelium network, which is, the underground network of roots that the mushrooms grow from, which is thousands and thousands of, maybe even millions of years old. And when you ingest a mushroom, you are ingesting all of that and all the other compounds within the mushroom. And all of that is important. It's not just the psilocybin. And so I know that when it is legalized and when it is being rolled out by the NHS or whoever, it's not going to be the mushrooms. It's going to be an isolated tablet, and it's not quite the same. It's sort of slightly missing the point, because this is so much more than just feeling better. This is about bringing a connection back to nature, to ourselves. It's about community. It's so much more than just taking a substance. And that's just not in our medical paradigm. It just, that isn't considered or honored. A lot of that knowledge and wisdom is just being discarded by the West as unimportant. And surely we're at a stage now in our evolution, and what we're seeing everywhere with this mental health crisis is that actually perhaps this is the missing link. Perhaps we do need to start understanding ourselves outside of just the physical realm, that we are spiritual beings having a human experience, and perhaps there is more to us and more to life than what we can see and touch and measure. So I just feel that even if it is legalized, I hope and I will be supporting and working with mushrooms, even if that means continuing to work underground. I'm there for it. I will die on that hill. I feel so passionate about it, as you might be able to tell.
I think it's hard. I think you're completely right. I think a lot of Western medicine, we focus on trying to almost get, it's like if you take a protein shake, the idea of everyone's like, oh, I want this purely to be protein. And I'm like, but if you look at every other food and every other, that's not that's not the only ingredient. And I say this as someone that uses them, but then I'm always an advocate for they're a tool that if you need to use them. Other than that, rely on normal food. And it's the same thing of why do we always try and cherry pick things and medically adjust and change things just to make them work? I'm like, just take what works for you.
It's always about the money, though, I think. I think it always boils down to money. And also, we live in a culture where we want the quick fix. We want the easy way. We don't want to have to work to heal. We just want to take a pill and for it to do its thing, and that's it. And the thing with microdosing and larger doses is the mushrooms are not going to do the work for you. You still need to do the work. So when I say the work, I mean, the inner personal work, the development of self, the addressing of what's really going on for you on a root cause level. That still needs to be addressed. The mushrooms are not going to magically transmute that for you, and a lot of people are disappointed about that.
Yeah. I think it's often advertised as the miracle, it's the same with marijuana. Everyone's advertising it as the miracle drug. Now, yes, everyone has their benefits, but it's it's all down to tools. They're tools to help you get better. It's not a one thing fixes all. I think that's a society thing where we just want this magic thing of it just works, and that's not always going to be the case.
But also I truly believe there is no quick fix when it comes to healing. The healing journey, I believe, is a lifelong journey. And there is, if something is a quick fix, then generally, it has a shelf life. It work for a while, and then often things go back to the way they were. If we want to see long lasting change and healing, then it's a slow, steady process, and there's no way around it.
On that note of like people having to like, it's a long process. Is there anything on like becoming dependent on microdosing and dependent on psychedelics? Is there anything you come across to do with that?
Well, that actually psilocybin is classed as sort of anti-addictive because of the way that it works within our system. We create tolerance to the psilocybin insanely quickly. So you cannot take psilocybin every day indefinitely, because it will just literally within days or weeks, it will stop working. So the way that it works within our body and our brain means that it's very hard to, you cannot become physically addicted. Having said that, I have seen with clients and in my work that people can become reliant on it, or they use it as a kind of spiritual bypassing tool. So what I mean by that is they'll become a little bit sort of obsessed with doing a psychedelic experience semi-regularly and feeling like they're ticking a box. Oh, I'm healing because I'm doing psilocybin retreats and journeys, etc. And actually, they're not really doing the work that's needed. They're sort of skirting around it, and it can become sort of something that they are. So it's not addiction in the true sense of the word, but I think people can use it in ways that are unhelpful.
Yeah, it's more of a dependency rather than the addiction. It's almost like that whole thing of almost, I suppose, coffee. No, because coffee is an addictive substance, but it's that whole. Oh, I need it to be able to do this. It's like what you were just saying about taking it and expecting it to do the work for you. It's kind of like the way my brain went was, it's like eating healthy and then expecting you to just get stronger. And I'm like, no, that happens in the gym. That part happens in the kitchen. It's the same thing of you can take it, but you got to do the work to actually see the benefit of it. You can't use it as a cheat sheet.
Yeah, exactly. But also, there's a lot of good research coming out around psilocybin being very helpful for addictive issues. Especially, there's been some research in stopping smoking, tobacco, and also heavy alcohol use, especially with microdosing as well. There's good research showing that it really, really supports people in coming away from those addictive processes in their life. And that's going to be a new frontier of addiction medicine for sure. I mean, there's other psychedelics that are being investigated for that. Ibogaine is one of them for opioid addiction and also alcohol. And, this is really interesting that Bill Wilson, who was the founder of Alcoholics Anonymous, he used LSD in overcoming his alcohol addiction. And but he was kind of heavily told or suggested not to bring that into the AA paradigm because they, a lot of people sort of, if something's a drug, like all drugs are bad, that's a conditioning we've had in our society. And so in the 50s, that was very much the war on drugs and everything was very much the thinking around that time. But he did use LSD successfully for his own alcohol addiction. And actually, there's a new fellowship, a new-ish fellowship which is I wrote down the name of it actually, Psychedelics in Recovery, which is a fellowship program for people who want to become sober from alcohol or narcotic use, and they use psychedelics as one of their tools in staying in recovery. So yeah, there's a lot of, and it's definitely an area that I am interested in going into in the future. I'm training as a trauma therapist as well. And so we know that a lot of addiction is born from trauma. And I definitely see myself in the future using psychedelics and trauma therapy as a way to help people with addiction issues.
I'm actually really intrigued to see the impact on the neurodiverse community, particularly ADHD. I think that one's going to be really interesting. Having spoken to a number of my friends of their experiences with alcohol as ADHD, because it's like they're almost in two camps of like one steer very clearly from it, or one it's almost like it's like that it quietens the voices in their head. That's the only way I can describe it. That's the way they've described it to me. So like I'm really intrigued to see where psychedelics might be able to slot in and become almost maybe a healthier alternative. I don't even know whether that's the right thing to say, but
well, it is. I mean, alcohol we know is a toxin, and mushrooms, for instance, are not. They have sort of next to no toxicity. Nobody died of taking too many mushrooms. But actually the neurodivergence aspect of it, there's a lot of not a lot, but there is some research around LSD being more helpful for neurodivergence than any other substance. Microdosing it. So, I know that there are a lot of neurodivergent coaches out there who are using microdosing LSD as a tool for helping calm the chatter in the brain, etc., and for focus and for motivation.
That's mad. And coming on to that point, though, is there any downsides? Like we've spoken about a lot of the positives of psychedelics and microdosing. But are there any downsides? Obviously, like you just said, there's no. I think on the risk scale, psychedelic is one of the lowest in terms of the likelihood of you doing harm to yourself or others while having taken it. But are there any risks?
Yeah, there are. And microdosing and psychedelic use is not for everyone. And in terms of who is not suitable for microdosing, I mean, it also depends on the substance, because we think of microdosing as mushrooms, but microdosing, as we've talked about, can be many different things. But generally, if we're talking about mushrooms, anyone who is in a highly emotional state, it's not advisable to microdose or do a larger experience because of the fact that they can amplify emotion. So if you're in sort of a grief, at the height of your grief, or you're having you're in a breakup or whatever it is, I never will take on clients at that stage of that process. It definitely can be useful further down the line, but in the sort of crisis stage, it's not helpful for most people. The other sort of contraindications for microdosing and larger experiences are certain medications. Some people, that like tramadol and lithium are two medications that really it's not advisable to mix psychedelics with them. There are other ones as well. Certain heart conditions that people have, they should be really mindful and careful about using psychedelics. The two other ones that are actually really interesting, anyone who has severe mental health history or close family history of severe mental health, like I'm talking about things like psychosis or schizophrenia. It used to be more sort of said that that's, no to psychedelics, but actually there is some research coming out showing that microdosing in particular can be helpful for people with those conditions. And of course, I'm always talking about taking these substances being guided by someone who is experienced, because that is a completely different process to just winging it on your own. But if you have, or seizures, epilepsy, and it's never a black and white issue. You know, if you have epilepsy or seizures due to chemical withdrawal, you know, substance use disorder, with, you know, if you're coming off alcohol and you had seizures, that, you know, generally you're going to probably be okay with psychedelics. But if it's an organic pathological reason, then some caution needs to be in place. So and some people just don't get any benefit. They'll have the experience and they just feel like there's no benefit for them. So it's definitely not a cure-all for everyone. And also, sort of a growing concern is the amount of people who are going into unsafe spaces of people holding psychedelic ceremonies that perhaps are not trauma informed, and people, even in the microdosing space, it can be re-traumatizing or destabilizing for people to go into those processes, the microdosing process, the larger experience process, without proper support. It can cause more problems than it solves. The set and setting, even with microdosing, is important. So there are many considerations when going into this. It isn't something that just anyone can do.
I think that's always been my concern with it, is like, it's always been that bit in the back of my head, like, if I went full hog and did more of an experience, what the hell is my brain going to drag up? Do I really want to find that out, or do I not?
But you know what? Actually, it's a really good point, because I think a lot of people, like people who come to me who want a larger experience, because that's also something that I facilitate, but often they'll have so much anxiety and fear because sometimes they've had a bad trip as a teenager or a young person in a recreational setting, which, you know, of course, there's a much higher risk if you're just taking a load of mushrooms and you're going to a festival, that there's a lot of factors that can go wrong there. But in all honesty, when you're you're having a larger experience, like for me personally, I do not take people into a larger experience unless they've done a microdosing program with me, because it's about building a relationship and trust in the medicine and understanding how it works for you, because it's such a different experience for everyone, and doing a lot of preparation and a lot of care and love being put into the experience itself, with a lot of integration afterwards. You do not find that people have experiences that are re-traumatizing or destabilizing because of the preparation and intention. And, you know, for sure, you can have really challenging experiences. And in some ways, when you go through a huge mystical experience, or, you know, so that often does come with challenge. It's not all bliss and unicorns and fairies, you know. Often the kind of real transformation comes from entering into our darkness, but it doesn't have to be traumatic. And if you're in the right setting, and if you're being supported and guiding by someone who is trauma informed and experienced in that, then it's very unlikely you're going to have an experience that's going to leave you with that sort of like, oh my God. But it's very common that people have, you know, of course, have trepidation. It's, you know, the biggest fear is, what if I never come back from it? You know, that's a really common anxiety that people have. Yeah.
I remember one of my ones was, I was in Amsterdam with my other half. I've never taken psychedelics, always been very intrigued, but kind of, as I just explained, got that whole thing of, what the hell am I going to be dragged up? But one of the things my partner pointed out was, if we did it and you, because I've got an electric thing that attaches to my wheelchair, and you decided to take off, I can't catch you, and that's a problem.
Yeah, that could be a problem. So you're right. I think having a healthy fear and respect for that experience is really important. I think when people are just so gung ho and you know, flippant about it, that's when the problems arise. Yeah, it's good to have a healthy respect for the possibilities.
Definitely. The other thing I wanted to ask you was if you had any sort of advice for anyone that were looking for more natural remedies? Obviously, a lot of your work stems around being more natural and steering away from Western medicine. Have you come across any remedies that you really wish, oh God, I really wish more people knew about the benefits of doing this for this certain problem or this certain ailment, or just in general to better people's health?
I mean, aside from mushrooms, obviously, but also, like functional mushrooms, like lion's mane and reishi and cordyceps and turkey tail. I mean, the research coming out about the functional mushroom side of things is incredible. And people who do I run like an 8-week program, a microdosing program online. And once people have completed that, they can join a community where we talk about adding in functional mushrooms for so many different reasons. I mean, the research coming out about lion's mane with Alzheimer's, dementia, turkey tail in terms of cancer, tumor reduction, cordyceps is amazing for immunity. I think more people need to know about it's not just about psychedelic experiences. Mushrooms are amazing.
To be honest, the only one I knew of, apart from obviously psychedelic mushrooms, is lion's mane. That was the only other one I kind of knew a bit about. Other than that, is your household mushrooms.
Well, yeah, there's that. They are like they because of the they're just so. They just have so many amazing properties, and reishi in particular is amazing for anxiety. I have used that a lot in the past and found it to be really, really powerful and profound. That's kind of, I wish, and it is getting more in the mainstream for sure. Like, especially like the mushroom coffees. I mean, I haven't really looked into that, whether that's just a gimmick. I'm not entirely sure, because also, sort of being very mindful about where you're sourcing the mushrooms from, and also the amount you need to take for a therapeutic effect. How much lion's mane do you need to help with Alzheimer's? It's probably not going to be the amount that you're going to get in your morning coffee. More need, and I think more will come out about it. I think it is becoming more and more people are interested in it. More and more people are coming away. I mean, I don't know if this is because I live somewhat in an echo chamber, because everyone I'm friends with and hang around with is sort of this interested in the same things and interested in alternative medicine. But it does seem like there's more and more people interested in alternative ways of approaching health. It does seem like there is a kind of pivot towards that.
Definitely, and I think it's just that whole thing of people leaning now more towards healthy alternatives. One thing I did want to ask, as someone who is this, any advice for someone that doesn't like my big, and I'm sure you've heard this before and you're probably thinking, oh, you God, you're one of these. Any advice for anyone that doesn't like the texture of mushrooms?
It's very common. It depends. If you're in terms of like larger dose ceremonies, if people really don't like chewing and eating the mushrooms, which most people don't actually, is you can grind it into a powder, and then you can add it into warm water. If you're looking for ways, if you're wanting more normal functional mushrooms, the other way is to take it in a capsule, to grind it and put it in a capsule and take it that way. Yeah. Really, that's the only way you're going to get around the texture side of things. But it's very common that people really do not like eating mushrooms. A lot of people say it's like eating slugs. Yeah. I personally love it. But I kind of get it. Yeah.
I'm right there. I was that kid picking out the mushrooms out of every dish my mum makes. So I think, and the worst thing is, it was the realization it is purely the texture. Any other form of mushroom I can deal with, like mushroom soup, big fan. Just chewing it. It's like chewing on a bit of leather, and I'm like, nah, it's not for me.
Yeah.
But there you go.
Yeah.
Have you done any more around sort of away from? I know your specialist area is mushrooms, but have you done anything away from mushrooms in terms of more like health remedies and nootropics and things like that?
I mean, I'm interested in, I've always had an interest in homeopathy and things like that, and herbs in general. But to be honest, I have gone down a mushroom rabbit hole, and I am yet to emerge. So yeah, I trained with the Microdosing Institute in Amsterdam for a year, and it was a full on course, and I've sort of got this hyper focus. So I know as time goes on, I'm going to have a wider perspective on other things. But at this time, I'm just obsessed with psilocybin in the main. Mushrooms, but psilocybin in the main. Yeah.
One last question, and it's been something that I've been stewing on as we've gone through the episode. I know that you're very focused on natural medicine. Do you think there's a place for what's known as functional medicine, which is a bit of a blend of Western medicine and more natural remedies? Do you think there's a place for functional medicine?
Absolutely. And it's not that I am against sort of allopathic medication. I think there is a place for it. Nothing is ever black and white, right? So it's just, I think, we overuse medication. It's the first port of call, where I often think it should be the last port of call. I think if we can blend natural remedies and allopathic medication in like they do in functional medicine, I think that's the future. I think there is a place for all of it. I am definitely not, I have a huge distrust of the mainstream, but at the same time, I know it to be true that there is an absolute place. It can save lives. It can make lives better. But it's just finding that balance, I think, of the two things. And absolutely, I am definitely not one or the other. Bring it all in. Yeah.
I'm literally, the more I interview people, the more I realize that is the ultimate goal, is utilizing completely everything that humans know, being what's known as Western medicine now and functional medicine that was used more in the past and is having a bit of a resurgence, because I'm like, if it works for you, great. Like, it's that whole thing of why do we keep having to force people in boxes? If people have a better experience with Western medicine over natural medicine, go with the Western. Same goes the other way. I don't get it. I don't get it.
No, I know. We live in a strange world. We
certainly do. And on that note, I'm going to hit you with the last question, which I did give you a bit of a heads up with before we started recording, which I ask every guest, which is, what's one piece of politically correctness that you really strongly agree with or disagree with?
I mean, gosh, so many. Political correctness. I mean, I guess it's going to have to be to do with mushrooms, right? And kind of harping back a bit to labeling all drugs as bad. I just think we need to start coming out of that paradigm. Heroin, morphine is, if it's prescribed, somehow it's okay. But if you're taking it outside of a prescription, it's not. That's madness. We need to start to deconstruct how we view medicines, and really, there's so many sort of rigid structures within our mainstream medical system that need to be brought down and redesigned. And psilocybin, please God, let it be first on the list.
I completely agree. And I think with the whole legalization thing and like the one side being okay and the other side not, it purely just comes down to controlling the end product. Because I'm 100% behind, you don't know what you're picking up on the street, 100% behind that. It could be anything. But why can't we just have professional bodies that supply it and then problem solved? Exactly. It's not rocket science.
But that's the whole thing about the war on drugs is actually you're just pushing these substances into the hands of people who may not have your best interests at heart. And if we took that away and we legalized all drugs like they've done in Portugal, they've seen their crime rate fall by 50%, overdoses fall by a huge amount. If you tax it, if you regulate it, it's actually going to become much safer. And out of the hands of criminals. And you stop making people who use it into criminals when these are just people seeking healing for the most part, So, yeah, with you on that one.
100%. And thank you so much for coming on. I've learned so much. It's been a great episode. And just thank you so much. I will link all of your details below. So if anyone wants to check Naomi out, anything that she's doing, or check out her courses, hit the links below, and I'm sure she'll be happy to take your message.
Thank you, Charlie. Thank you so much. It's been great fun.
Thank you so much for tuning into this week's episode of the Not Quite Podcast. Please make sure you follow us on TikTok and Instagram to get regular updates about the podcast.
These bad guys make it hurt.